Morning, everybody. It's just a shade after 8:45, so I'm going to suggest we make a start. Welcome to the session on civic and community. I'm going to pause for just a moment. If colleagues do want to come a bit closer, because we're in the huge room on Friday morning, so if some of you kind of about a mile away over there do want to come a little bit nearer, that might be helpful a little bit later on. The format for this session is going to be, we've got 3 talks. I'll explain a little bit more about those in a few moments. And then we're going to have a kind of hopefully about half an hour time for discussions and conversations. There will be a roving mic or 2 floating about. So again, if we are reasonably compact as an audience, that might help them shifting the mic about. Otherwise, there's a lot of running that's going to happen in that session. So, my name's Dan King. I'm one of the conference organising committee and director at a company called Research Consulting. We specialise in bespoke consultancy work for research organisations, those that do research, those that fund research, and some of those that publish research, plus a bunch of other organisations. So my role this morning is really just to chair and facilitate the session, and pretty much to get away from this lectern as soon as possible and to hear from our expert speakers. One thing I do want to do, though, is just reflect on some of the things that the conference has already discussed and already heard about that relate to this session. And I was reflecting a little bit on how civic and community engagement has already featured quite a lot through the course of the conference so far in references and relevant examples that we've seen. In the opening talk, Jessica Corner from Research England shared a slide from work looking at academic participation in knowledge exchange, and I was struck by just how much community engagement featured in that in terms of academic engagement in that area. It was strongly evident in the presentation and examples from the 2 Nottingham universities yesterday under their Universities for Nottingham initiative, which extended out even to a doctoral training programme via their co-laboratory project. And in other sessions we've seen things touch on this area. Commercialisation of social sciences was talking about how community interest companies are often one of the ways in which that commercialisation is realised, and we also heard elements of that in conversations around internal cultures for knowledge exchange. I've been worked in and around knowledge exchange since 2000, various different roles in universities before taking on my current role. And a couple of the things I've observed is how over that time this area has changed from something that was often sort of a nice to do towards something that's much more focused, aligned to need and delivering impact into communities. And secondly, a continued discussion, and I originally wrote angst, but then changed it to discussion, but I think maybe both apply over metrics. One of those areas of knowledge exchange that's very hard to measure in discrete terms, and there are no easy metrics for that. And ultimately, we need to focus on value and not metrics. And that value, I think, needs to be considered both externally and internally. So on to this morning's session. We have 3 talks from 5 experienced practitioners. I'm not going to say too much about this. You can see, if you have a look on the conference website in the speaker bios, you can see some of the range of experience, the range and depth of experience we have here this morning. When we look to select the talks and the presentations for this session, we deliberately chose 3 examples that illustrate different scales and levels of activity. So Diane will lead off. Her talk focuses on work developing community engagement at the King's Centre for Medical Engineering. Then we'll have Claire and Jenny, who will talk about the Community Chesterfield project, a funded project focused on Chesterfield, a market town just to the north of Derby, sited between the 2 cities of Derby and Sheffield. And finally, Grace and Jenny from the University of Plymouth will share some of their learning from an institutional programme supporting community-led research projects across the university. So we have 3 different types of examples and case studies to share with you today, and hopefully at the end of that we'll have some good discussions around some of the questions and perspectives on those from the conference today. So first of all, let me welcome Diane to talk about her work in London. Thank you.
See how this works. Oh, let's keep skipping. Okay, good morning, everybody. I hope you're enjoying the conference so far. This is my first day, so this is quite formidable, this room, but that's okay. I'm going to kick us off. So I'm Deanne Nowler, and I work at the Centre for Medical Engineering at King's College, London. So just a little bit about me. My role is as the Community Engagement Officer, and I've been there since the end of 2020. So yes, in the middle of lockdown, and was working at home for a lot of that. Being community and working at home, interesting combination. But it has been one of the challenges in trying to develop this work of community engagement in research over the last couple of years. But actually my background, the majority of my working career was in museums and culture, and I'm still connected with that world. But one of the things that has always kind of connected the work I've done before in places like the Science Museum is that I've always worked in public involvement and developing a practice of equitable collaboration and partnerships. And my focus is also very much on the inclusion of minoritized communities and addressing the inequalities that they face. So that's run through all the work I've done, and that's what I've brought to this particular program and project development. So that's what's kind of led me to higher education, institutions and research, and the idea of having a direct impact on the education and the healthcare knowledge of local people, people outside of the higher education community and the research community. So just a kind of place where I am, where that work is happening. Have I done it? No, I didn't. There we go. So for those of you who don't know, King's College London is based in Lambeth and Southwark Borough, as well as a bit of Westminster, and I'm based within the Waterloo campus. I'm literally next door to St Thomas's Hospital, overlooking the water and looking at the Big Ben. That is my view, as you can see, which is very nice. But it's been a real journey for me to understand, coming into higher education and research, exactly where I sit. So my faculty is of life sciences and medicine, and then within that I sit in a school of academia and clinicians in the School of Biomedical Engineering and Imaging Sciences. Not being a scientist or researcher myself, this has been very interesting to understand what does that mean, what do they do, what do they cover, and it's pretty much every area of healthcare, which is a challenge, and I will go into that in a bit. Using technology, using imaging to improve healthcare, better diagnosis, and better treatment of a variety of different conditions. So within that, there is a Wellcome and EPSRC funded research centre called the Centre for Medical Engineering, which is where I work. And a little bit of that is also another programme called MITHRAS, which looks at radio, I'm going to get technical and get this wrong, so I'm hoping no one knows about this. Radionuclide therapies and imaging, yes. But basically, that's just a kind of place that, so the community engagement I'm doing is based in Lambeth and Southwark. It's very hyper-local, and it's based specifically around linking the research and the work going on in this particular centre, which is focusing on that engineering and imaging, but within heart conditions, brain conditions, and cancers. So it's narrow, which, as you can appreciate when you go out into the community, to think about how do we engage our work with them and their lives, and they're like all the other things, and we're like, no, we know about this particular thing. So again, one of the challenges. But what we've tried to do is, because the centre's been open since 2017, and the centre not being a place but being a collection of researchers and academics and clinicians, they have been championing public engagement since they opened, with a dedicated public engagement team, and that is where I sit. I sit within the centre and the school's public engagement team. So it isn't until 2020 when they expanded this public engagement to include a community-centred approach to knowledge exchange. So we've trialled different methodologies, activities to establish and re-establish some of these relationships that we've had in the community in the past, but also new ones as the community change, our local communities change. That's to try and lead to greater dialogue, collaboration, and equitable partnerships between researchers and the communities they work in. The audience we're targeting, after a lot of thinking and strategizing, yes, is the local communities in Lambeth and Southwark, but specifically those underserved by healthcare and research. The purpose being to build relationships with marginalised communities in these areas, to share resources, to increase access to knowledge exchange, and to influence research practice and priorities. So what I'm hoping to discuss in the next few minutes is how this approach, I've gone about this approach, and also how this is influencing the way in which our university in particular, but maybe universities more broadly, who are engaging community, engaging with the community engagement, relate to underserved communities and the benefits that this can bring. The first job I had to do, however, was to think about how we define that distinction between public and community engagement and the purpose of this work. So after lots of thinking for the first year or so and lots of conversations and really investigating what does engagement mean in higher education, and then what are those different ways in which it manifests. In terms of within research engagement, our centre, we see it as, what I see it as, but I've convinced a lot of people, that it's almost a Venn diagram. So you have public engagement, which my impression was it felt very research-driven. What were the questions that research needed answering? Who could be involved in answering them? But those questions were set by the research community. And then you had community engagement, which was very much driven by the community, the priorities, the issues, the challenges they're facing, and how can our knowledge support and assist them. So lots of different things will come in, different priorities, different motivations come into those different circles. But when you bring them together, in the middle you can see with this thing where we have people, we have research, knowledge, and engagement. And this is the two things that kind of bring these two together. That they might have different starting points, but their goal at the end of the day is to bring people together for the advancement of knowledge, research, and then by engaging lots of different people in that, you get a richer source of this knowledge. But not only do you have to think about this, but also what is that in relation to the civic engagement that the university is taking part of. So I had to begin to think about the different ways and explore the different ways in which engagement is happening across King's and the college, from student volunteering to patient involvement. So my way of doing that was to have an understanding, a mapping of what engagement was happening generally, and then what was actually the centre, or as we go back to thinking about the School of Biomedical Engineering and Information Sciences, what were the resources available in that space, the knowledge, the skills, the priority impacts that they're looking at, the money, the people, and where does this intersect with the community's priorities and their interests, so that we can think about where can we support them with a genuine interest in being part of the local community, and not just serving, but really being a member who's impacted by changes that are happening around us. So this is where I come back to my challenge of establishing community engagement and research in a research setting and developing engagement that's mutually beneficial, because there are very different agendas that are happening within the research community and the wider local communities, and making sure that the ask is coming from both rather than from just one. So a little bit about the approach I took. It was around building relationships. That was the most essential thing at the beginning in order to improve engagement locally. And it was inspired by an asset-based approach, so thinking about communities as having assets as well as our research centre and college, and also community organising principles. So the idea of thinking about relational connections and building that to build power in both spaces and challenging the power dynamics that exist between big institutions and then smaller community organisations and members. So my first thing was to listen, lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of listening, to both the local communities and the organisations that work with them, but also researchers and understanding how they work and what their needs are. So these conversations, one-to-ones, many of them, with various different people, help to build knowledge and connections and trust, also an understanding of local priorities in the area, and what issues people are focusing on. What's the realities of living in two of the most diverse boroughs in London for a majority of those residents? And through that, distilling out willing partners who want to work with us, who we can see synergy with. Some stuck, some didn't, but that's okay, because that's what happens. But actually just an awareness and being present in the community was really important, showing how Kings could be part of where they reside and where they work. Then the second was discussion. What's the opportunities about the nuts and bolts of who we are, who are the two communities, within the university and outside, what brings us together, and figuring out the why and the how we should work holistically together. From that came the collaboration, leading to action, co-developing activities and programs, developing meaningful and respectful partnerships that then could bring more value to the communities and mutual benefits as well through those collaborations. I'm giving you a whistle-stop tour, I hope. It's going to give me time. So just a couple of examples of how we did this through some of our partnerships. The first being Queen Street Neighbourhood Community Centre, which is in the north bit just by the river between Lambeth and Southwark. And they do lots of work. They're a community interest group who have existed since the mid-80s, when they worked for residents when there was a lot of building works and development happening in the area, which could have really taken apart their community, but they kept together with this initiative. And so we've been working with them in different ways through one of our civic engagement programs that happen at King's called Civic Challenge. And that was an opportunity for us to bring researchers together with community partners to look at a community challenge that they wanted to address. And so by supporting them through not just by people being involved, but also financially, we were able to have a strand where it was specifically researchers who got involved with a community project. And it was an opportunity for the community partners, to see how researchers could work as a team member, bringing their different skills in a project that was driven, and a joint project that was driven by the community. And that was very successful and has gone on to have more ripples, and we hope to continue to be involved in the outputs of that first project, which was looking at building a well-being hub within the community and revitalising an older community centre, and doing that through research practice like consultation, analysing the data that was around, the local borough data, things that the community partners did not have time to do, not necessarily the skills either, but we could bring that. As we developed that, we then had broader conversations with the partner, looking at families and building trust through good faith, basically saying, they were like, we have a program that's about families who, they want to do more science things, but we don't know what to do. Do you have any ideas? So we brought experiments, and we made jelly brains. The kids ate them, they enjoyed them. But that meant that we got that, we were there, we were being present, and we were showing up in the way that they needed us to. And so we've continued to do that by adding value to the programs. And what we hope is by feeding this relationship, there will be a reciprocal point where they have trust in us to be involved in the things that we have going on and see opportunity to grow by working through us. Then the other, very quickly, example is Global Generation, which is a community garden in South Southwark. And with them, again, it was around what do they have and how can we add value? And through sessions like the Twilight Gardening, which you can see here, where adults come in the evenings to do gardening and to have a meal, we included researchers to kind of bring connections between health science and nature, and having conversations. So there's lots of different ways in which we've tried to build those relationships. Yes, through activities that are very much linked to science, and the research we're doing and sharing that, but also through just social activities that bring our researchers out into the community and give them opportunity to be people, bringing the human back into research. And that's developed, the partnership developed by making sure that we could then include a memorandum of understanding. So there was a partnership agreement to kind of solidify what we wanted to do, and no one felt that there was a common understanding of what we wanted to do together, including resources and what could be offered on both sides. and co-producing sessions and sharing skills such as they taught us how to do reflective creative feedback with, you can see some of the cards on over there and over there, that was writing how the experience had, what feelings and thoughts it had brought up, which isn't necessarily a method we would have used, but it's brought out a lot of rich data for us as well. So very quickly, just some of the outcomes that we've had because of that. We've developed, as I said, some of the conversations and the discussions we've had have led to meaningful, substantial relationships with about 3 or 4 of our local partners. We have had co-developed activities within the local community. We've shared resources like our Community Health Fund, where we were able to provide pots of money for applicants from community organisations to deliver their own community health projects, which we can support, but actually we just went, here's the money, off you go. You know your community, do what you need to do. Bringing voices back into the centre, into the school, with community board meetings where they get to meet researchers and speak about what's happening. Upskilling researchers with these different experiences so they could also imagine what they can do apart from a survey or a PPI meeting. What are the other ways in which they can engage with the public in their local communities? Providing them with the training, the researchers with the training, in order to support that engagement so they can go off and feel they can do that by themselves as well, or with minimal help from our team, just a little bit of scaffolding from us, but they feel the initiative and the confidence to go off and do that. Just some of the challenges. Time, always time. It's never enough time. And I have realised just how long it takes to develop these relationships, both within the university and the community. Also, the time it takes to develop the activities and the space because everyone's busy or time poor. So really considering how much time you need is absolutely essential, and knowing it might take longer than you think. The resources, thinking about what there is and how you best use them, from people, skills, money, always, but also just how you can use them very effectively. And having the commitment from both, and I think definitely from the researcher side that's been a big lesson to me. How do I promote commitment from researchers so they are as invested in this as I am, and as the communities begin to be as well from these conversations? Acknowledging that we are developing with our communities so that there is learning on both sides, and we won't do it right all the time, but we will try our darndest to be, to think about what we do and reflect on it afterwards, and being willing to do something different from what you imagined. The conversations are collaborative, they can go anywhere. So it's really being open to seeing what could be rather than what you imagine would happen at the beginning. For me, a huge thing has been recognising the systems in which we work. Things like how people are paid. For anyone who's done it, I see nods out there. Yeah. The structures that are put in place at the moment are not made for community engagement. And so there's a thing of challenging that and making sure we actually reform to be able to allow us to do the work we want to do in this kind of engagement. And that there is power in the development of the values, the equitable values and principles of your practice, and having that as your cornerstone of knowing what your values and principles are and the ways that you want to be perceived and the ways that you want to develop these kinds of relationships are absolutely core, because they can be pulled, you're being pulled in lots of different directions as that Venn diagram showed. So actually it's about what is it you're trying to do, how do you want to do it, and how are you going to do that with integrity? So that always pulls you back to your centre. And that is it from me. I hope that wasn't too long. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Your final slide there was your contact details. So our next speakers, we take a slightly different scale now in terms of the project and the dimension. We're going to go and sort of relocate our thinking to Chesterfield. So I'm pleased to welcome Claire Carter from the University of Derby and Jenny Rashbar from Community Chesterfield to talk about their project.
Morning all. Hello everybody. So I'm Jennifer Rashbar. I'm the project director for the Community Chesterfield project, based in Chesterfield but covering a lot of Derbyshire. And this is my colleague Claire.
So I'm Claire Carter, a Senior Lecturer and Business Relationship Manager in the College of Health, Psychology and Social Care at the University of Derby.
So this project came about because one of our colleagues was chatting to another colleague at an event they went to, and we realised that across the community and across the organisations that we both worked in, there were huge possibilities for collaboration. So I work for an organisation called Derbyshire Voluntary Action, which is an infrastructure organisation that supports 337 voluntary and community sector groups and organisations across Derbyshire, all of which have a health and well-being focus. So that ranges from very large charities, some of which have a national scope and some of which are very regional, to tiny grassroots peer support groups that meet maybe monthly to support their members. So there's a huge, rich pattern and diversity and enormous numbers of stories, individuals, different healthcare conditions, different challenges, socio-economic issues as well, and a huge wealth of learning that can be shared from all of these groups. And my colleague Claire.
As I said, I'm from the College of Health, Psychology and Social Care, and at Foremost we have a campus up in Chesterfield where we were trying to embed the university in the community, and so the connections came around the health and well-being of that specific community, raising aspirations, health and well-being within that specific region, bearing in mind we had a campus, a very small campus, that housed initially our nursing students. And so it was about those conversations, how we can help raise health and well-being within that said community. And we looked and explored for probably a year around what are the possibilities, what are the synergies between the two organisations, what brings us together, how can we co-collaborate to the betterment of that community. And so along came an opportunity to go for some National Lottery funding, and we were successful in the first round, which enabled us to have a 3-year project, of which we are 1.5 years past that 3-year project. But this talk is purely about that 3-year project, and we'll touch on right at the end of how we've progressed since. And so we all know in that time we have had COVID. So actually the project itself and the ideas have actually developed quite fastly because of that. But it all comes back to the health and the well-being and raising aspirations within our community and how we embed our students and our staff within that community, bearing in mind that geographical region. Our students lived within that community, they worked in the community, they are the community, as well as our staff. And so it was about working with those synergies to co-collaborate and co-produce and support our community.
But from the community side, we realised that within the 337 organisations, there were some skills shortages that we wanted to address. There were opportunities to strengthen and build resilience within that sector, and support them in a way that they would never normally have the opportunity to be supported in from the University of Derby. And it's been a really exciting journey, as Claire said, 3-4 years now down the road, and it's developed, it's changed, it's evolved. And we were so keen in order to support the future healthcare professionals really and develop their practice as well. So underpinning all of this is knowledge exchange. You can see on the slides there that we've had 2 research publications, one of which is due to be published shortly, I think, and one was published last year. But it's much, much broader than that. The work that we do we'll talk about in more detail on the next slide, but knowledge exchange has included lecturers contributing towards a training programme that has supported the voluntary and community sector organisations. And we've gone out and chatted to our colleagues across the sector. We've understood their needs, we've understood their skills gaps, we've understood their desires to succeed in their organisations, and we've found ways in which we can support that through the resource at the University of Derby. So, for example, we've had professors deliver subjects around evaluation and measuring impact and monitoring, and also about sort of fundraising and marketing, and we involved students in developing a session around social media several years ago as well. And all of these things have been hugely popular. and well taken up by voluntary and community sector colleagues. The evaluation session in particular triggered some of our organisations to really rethink how they gathered that data and to use it in funding applications. And I mean, to date, I think organisations have said that through the work that they've done with us and the partnership with the University of Derby, they've actually been successful in attracting over £100,000 additional resource into their organisations, which is what we really hope to carry on doing. We've also created a really successful Experts by Experience programme. So the University of Derby, as per many universities, already had an established Experts by Experience programme based down at Derby. The campus at Chesterfield was a new campus, and one of the lecturers decided that it was an opportunity to utilise this project to do something new and do something a bit more creative and perhaps gain additional experience and voices to speak to students within the university. And so we've been asked over the last 4 years to find experts in a huge variety of topics, whether it's somebody who runs a charity talking about their economics and the financial state, or whether it's somebody who has lived experience of a really complex health issue, or somebody who's had an amputation, or somebody who's an unpaid family carer, or somebody who's undergone cancer treatment and the journey that they've gone through that. And obviously, because we work so closely with 337 organisations, I won't say that it's easy for us to find these people, but it can be quite straightforward. We know where to go, we know who to ask. The challenge with the easiness there is that many of our service users, they really are service users, and asking them to come in and speak to maybe 350 students in a lecture theatre within a university context, that's a big deal. And again, that's where we can step in with our support. So we invite them in. We quite often will do quite a bit of hand-holding on the day. During the pandemic, we enabled some speakers to deliver virtually as well. We had them in the office sitting with us at computers because they weren't natural computer users, some of the people we asked. But the benefit that this has had on some of those experts has been phenomenal. We had a gentleman who he's never ever interviewed anybody. He's always been on the receiving end of an interview panel. He has complex needs around sort of drug and alcohol abuse in his life, and he attends a service called Hope Springs, and we invited him in to support with interviewing mental health nurses to become part of that programme. And for him, he found the experience so enriching and rewarding because it gave him that different perspective. So we quite often try and choose people who are going to really benefit from that experience of sharing their story as well as offering them wraparound support to deliver their stories. And it's been a really, really successful programme. And touching upon something my colleague said earlier about pay, again, by having us do that bit of negotiation and that brokering, we mitigate a lot of those HR and payment issues. We're one supplier, the university can write us a purchase order, we can chase the university for a purchase order as and when it's needed, but we ensure that our service users and the Experts by Experience get paid directly, a donation to their organisation. So we navigate and avoid having to deal with a lot of the HR complexities, which again means that we can ask a different expert each time. We can bring in somebody who's excellent and has done it a couple of times, but we can also reach out and widen that pool and have a bigger experience. And different experts will bring different stories and different knowledge that they can share with staff and students.
And if I may just chip in there, it isn't just, and I don't mean it in a rude way, but it isn't just about the service users having their story and building their confidence and worth, I suppose, but it's also about the journey of the students in that classroom as well, and the academics in the room, to be able to appreciate and embed that within the curriculum and provide richness from that learning experience as well. So it really is a two-way opportunity throughout the project in terms of how we navigate and in terms of providing the knowledge exchange opportunities through the project.
And in fact, the feedback we get from students on the Experts by Experience programme is absolutely amazing. They tell us that it enables them to engage with the subject matter in a completely different way. And those lived experiences will stay with those students for a lot longer than just reading a textbook case, and will change the way they practice when they're out in the field. Running through all of the activities we do is this notion of trying to bring people together for peer-to-peer learning and breaking down those barriers between sort of patient and professional, and thinking about how we can do that in creative ways. So we've delivered sort of events, conferences, marketplace style opportunities for people to engage and ask questions and find out more. But we also support placements within the community of students, which for nurses particularly has been incredibly challenging. But we've had some really successful placements with, for example, the mental health students. Going out to a charity called P3 that supports people with their well-being. And they'll be doing unconventional things. You know, they'll be doing an activity alongside service users. And some of the student nurses have fed back to their lecturers that that wasn't what they expected. But actually the skills that they're gaining from that are really quite amazing.
Yeah. Yeah.
We also last year very successfully organised a walk, a mindfulness activity and a walk between unpaid family carers and student nurses. And again, the stories that come out when you're walking and the relationships that you form when you're walking are so different to those that you form in a classroom setting or in a professional setting. And that was hugely exciting. So as you can see, we do a lot of different things. We do shared learning, virtually or in person. We do the training and tea sessions, which are really successful. We contribute to modules, and we get involved and act as that sort of intermediary and broker to navigate the needs and requirements of both sides and try and find a balance that suits everybody. Civic.
So, from a university point of view, there has been some discussions over the last couple of years around civic engagement and bringing together activities across the university, and we signed a university civic agreement last year, of which Derbyshire Voluntary Action are a main signatory at an event last year. And Jenny and the Derbyshire Voluntary Action Chief Executive is part of our university civic network. We will have quarterly meetings about how do we embed, again, further beyond this project across the university. How do we embed as a university ourselves within a community? And so this project forms one element of that, and how we take this beyond the college, of which I said, I gave you a little bit of a starting point when we started, that we are now across the whole university. The project sits, we have got a strategic partnership agreement that sits across all of the colleges at the university, and how we embed this project across all areas and how we embed ourselves across the whole community and our region is really important to us as a university. Thinking about how we support health and well-being, securing our future as a community and as a university. But also, how do we drive ambition and positive change to those that we touch within our region, our students, our partners as well. And so that has been really helpful in catapulting the project to a high level within the university, but then also geographically and subject-wise, it's enabled us to progress a lot further within the last few months.
And if I might just add to that, it means that, for example, we're working with students in criminology, we're working with the law team. That gives the voluntary and community sector organisations we work with access to the legal business clinic, for example. It gives them access to HR support, and it gives them access to a huge number of assets and resources for free within the university that's truly phenomenal. But it also means that many of these organisations, they really support people in need within their neighbourhoods, but they're sticking band-aids on problems. The bigger problems around social mobility, around economic deprivation, are hugely prevalent within Derbyshire. We've got a very mixed county. We've got a lot of rural areas, we've got urban areas. Chesterfield itself has 3 areas which are in the UK's top 20% for the most deprived areas in the country. So how can we use this partnership to think that bigger scale stuff? How can we use it to drive regional development? How can we use it to get those community voices in shaping the future that they want to see for themselves and their people within the communities? How can we think about bringing graduates here, training people up, keeping them in Derbyshire, giving them the future that they deserve and they want in the local area? So suddenly the conversation has really changed, and it's become really quite exciting, you know, how we can work together to create a bigger, better future for everybody across Derbyshire. And hopefully solve some of these problems so that actually the voluntary and community sector organisations can perhaps stop sticking band-aids on people, because that doesn't solve these root problems. So it's a really exciting time to be involved, I think,
absolutely.
and take things forwards.
I think something that I haven't mentioned also is about those opportunities for our students in terms of employment, and that quite often, certainly for my college, the vast majority of our students will go into the national health system, but actually there is employment opportunities within the third sector. So it's opening those opportunities to the students, regardless whether they're within my college or across the university. Is that, you know, you've done Twitter takeovers, for example, with students, with organisations. How do we enable our students and our staff to really support and embed and provide further opportunities in terms of employment within that sector as well? So it is really kind of a life scope opportunities from the start to the end, and beyond being a student and beyond the university, around that community. So just a little bit of data here. I'm not going to read them all out to you, but you'll see that one side is around our students' feedback and evaluations from events and opportunities that we've provided. The right-hand side is about that feedback from the community groups that we work within. As you can see, it's been really successful, and it's certainly something that we explore at every event and every opportunity that we have connections with, whether that's the speakers, whether that's the students, whether that's the community groups, whether that's the academics, where it links with the modules. Everybody will be invited to participate in those evaluations, and depending on the activity, depends on the type of evaluations that we seek. But as you can see, it is really successful, and it's something that we are currently looking at in further detail about how do we demonstrate our impact within our community, which is a really challenging concept when you're exploring a very complex need, and you've already mentioned around how do we use that data and that evaluation around further funding opportunities, running further services. So this is really important. How we gather the data, how we use the data going forward is really important to us to provide that succession planning post not having lottery funding. We have been successful at getting a second round of lottery funding, hence is still going, but we are looking about that. Sustainability is very important for us currently for two organisations. How do we self-sustain this project? How do we sustain the great feedback and evaluations on everybody involved in that, whether it's co-production or it's delivering one way or the other, ensuring that that's enriched, appreciated and worthwhile in terms of its impact. So our final slide is about our lessons learnt and the challenges, and I think they're very similar. There's definitely, you know, how do we pull together around those synergies? As we said right back at the start, this is about us having a conversation, that we do have synergies between us. And at the point of everything that we have done is about what are our synergies together, where are our strengths working collaboratively in co-production in everything that we do, how do we embed ourselves in that community, how can we support one another. It isn't one way or the other, you know, we really appreciate the support of Community Chesterfield and Derbyshire Voluntary Action within our curriculum, with our students, within our staff, within the opportunities of research. And so those synergies are really important, and It did come from Chesterfield in terms of our campus being developed up there, but actually, as you've heard, we've now spread and it's across the region, it's across the whole university, but picking up still those synergies where we have those within the different colleges and how they can still be embedded within a health and wellbeing sector within our community. You did mention about relationships take time. As I said, we were probably in conversations and working on these synergies for a good year before we got lottery funding and exploring what they would be. We had 3 years of lottery funding and we're now probably 4.5, 5 years into knowing each other. And so it really does take time, not just our relationship, but what I'm talking is about those true relationships with each academic, each student, each community group, understanding the region, the needs of that community really does take time. And that is a continual process, bearing in mind our students come and go. And so it is a continual challenge around how do we embed, how do we continue with those relationships, considering the transient nature of students and staff at a university. And so that is a big challenge. You know, Jenny will say, you know, she's had great connections over the years, but when a staff member leaves, we have to pick that up again. And so how do we continually build on that relationship and make sure that we spend time getting to know one another on a personal level, on a professional level, and ensuring that it comes straight back to those synergies, you know, working with that desire and that passion on every level, whether that's the student, the staff, the community group, the public. It's just working with those synergies and investing that time heavily into that. COVID, I think I would like to say COVID has been a positive impact for us. It enabled us to go beyond just Chesterfield. It enabled us to embed within our Derby students. So at the time we were just within the college and we had students at Chesterfield and we had the same programme at Derby. So trying to embed that equity across a programme across multiple sites, COVID has enabled that. We were able to do a lot more digital work, more virtual work with our students, within our modules, within our academics, to create that exposure for the project. I don't know if you want to add anything else there.
I think building relationships across the whole university was facilitated by COVID too. I think that as people were driven to working from home, they became increasingly eager to get involved in more things. And the barrier of, oh, well, you're at St Helena's and that's an hour's drive away, was suddenly lost. So we had better attendance at some of the meetings that we had with university colleagues than we'd ever had before COVID. And that's continued to go forwards. And it's such a delight, isn't it, when you've built a relationship virtually and then you finally meet somebody in person. It's great.
So the next one is a big challenge to the two of us, probably more to Jenny than myself, but the timescales from a large organisation point of view is really challenging to work at speed. So we have eagerness from community groups, from the public and from Jenny and her team, but actually trying to work at speed to navigate the processes of a university is challenging when it's not set up to work necessarily in this way. And so it is about challenging our internal processes, raising the profile of the project. So some of those barriers become less of an issue because it is well known. I think the civic engagement, the civic partnership has made amends with that because there is more opportunities and more projects that are more challenging in this way. And so that is a big challenge for us in making sure that we are really proactive and supportive between the two sectors. I think it's probably the best way that I can put it. So sorry, Jenny.
No, that's absolutely fine.
But that comes back to the relationships.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, the one thing I would say is, we've talked about a 3-year funding cycle followed by a 2-year funding cycle. Now, if you think about the cycle it takes to get a course reaccredited and then delivered within a university, you'll see that the timescales just don't match up particularly well. So that's an ongoing sort of challenge. How do we find the resource to build something long term in the voluntary and community sector where short-term funding is the norm? So it's an ongoing challenge, but it's one that we're excited to meet.
Absolutely. So I've slightly touched on the equity across campuses and curriculum you touched on there. The rewriting of a nursing curriculum during a 3-year project was somewhat challenging because that does take time to write a whole new programme with professional bodies involved. But then how do we still embed this opportunity that we have for our staff, students and community? So, as I say, it's really about challenging what we have, how we have it, and be creative with the outputs that we can deliver with the structure and the processes that we have. So it is something that is always developing. Both organisations are constant transitional in terms of how we develop and how we co-produce and come together to work with one another. But it will always come back to what synergies do we have? How do we work more collaboratively together within the passion that we have and the opportunities that we have as two organisations coming together? So that is us. Happy to take any questions, but I know we're doing our main ones at the end.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm struck by the observation on the power of walking conversations. I think I've seen kind of more examples of that working so well in so many different kind of examples. So our final presentation for the session of Grace Williams and Jenny Milligan from the University of Plymouth, talking about why we should get involved. Over to you.
Good morning, everybody. Last presentation. I'm Jenny Milligan. I'm the Head of Regional and Civic Engagement at the University of Plymouth, and this is my colleague Grace. And we're going to talk to you about a very different type of programme. These are our Get Involved Awards. On the clicker. Now, before we start, a little bit of a potted history of Plymouth, because if you're going to understand community and civic engagement, you've got to really understand your place. And we think we really understand our place. We're a post-92 university in the very far southwest of England. We're that intersection between urban, rural and coastal. We're geographically peripheral. We've got terrible transport links, no motorway down to Plymouth. You'll remember a few years ago, the railway line washed away, so we were completely isolated. You couldn't get into or out of Devon or Cornwall. So we have a lot of challenges. We're in a beautiful county, but we are a dirty city. We're the 9th biggest manufacturing centre in the UK. We're the 15th biggest city in the UK. So we've got this real sort of differentiation between cream teas, beautiful cottages, building, deprivation. We're trying to bring all these things together in how we look at our civic and community engagement. Although we're post-92, we've been doing teaching and learning as an institution for over 150 years. We started off as a school of navigation, working with mariners. And any of you that have thought about Plymouth probably think of us in terms of marine and maritime. And that still pulls right the way through to what we do. But we are very much an organisation in our place and for our place. About 60% of our students are local and they stay local. And many of us that are public engagement practitioners, we've been doing engagement and civic for years, well before policy told us we should do it. We've done it because it's the right thing to do. So we've been doing this for ages, but I think if we were being honest, we were a little bit ad hoc, it was a little bit disjointed, and there was definitely nothing that sort of underpinned it across the university. So when the university wrote its 2030 strategy a couple of years ago, civic and engagement was put right at the heart of what we do, and therefore we appointed Grace Williams as our public engagement manager to look at all the disparate stuff we do, pull it together into a proper strategy, look at what we do well, look at what we can do differently, and thus the Get Involved Awards were born. These are small awards, and they really are for the benefit of both the researcher and the community. In fact, as we had started to think about the design of the awards, we brought our community partners in to say what would work, what should we do, what shouldn't we do. So the whole programme was designed with us and our communities together. We talk a lot about co-design in public and community engagement, and we've put co-design at the absolute heart of our Get Involved Awards. The problem or the challenge comes from the community groups. Our researchers are supporting those community groups. It is not about us doing unto our communities, it is working genuinely in partnership with our communities. We try and make the community groups feel part of our university community. We give them community research training, so we're embedding those skills in the university, so beyond the project they can take those forward. We make them associate members of the university so they can access the library and our other resources. So again, it's not just about us going to the communities, it's us bringing the communities into us, so we are working in a proper partnership. We link everything back to our strategy. We need to be able to demonstrate to our senior leaders that this is a good thing to do. So every time that we're looking at a decision, we're saying, yes, this does deliver against our civic mission. This does deliver against our 2030 strategy. We are passionate about our place in Plymouth. We are passionate about our city. So we've designed the Get Involved Awards specifically for our city, for our community. If you want to benefit from it, you've got to have a PL postcode. You know, we're not pretending to be able to work on a grand scale. We're working very much within our place. And the benefit of the work that we're doing has to be felt in the city. We've had some great projects come forward that we haven't been able to support. There was a lovely project around bereavement counselling. The community group was in Plymouth. It was doing fantastic work. But the people it was supporting were for outside of the county and outside of our region. So that wasn't a fit for us. We're really clear that this is about benefit in the city for the city. They're small awards. They're only between £6,000 and £8,000. We fund it through our participatory research funding from Research England. So we're very clear that we want that money to make a difference. And although they're small, we think that the impact is really mighty, and Grace will touch on that in a little bit. They're fairly new. We didn't start them until 2021, so we didn't know what the response would be. You know, we knew we were taking a bit of a punt. But this is just one quote from one of our community workers. So you can see that it is really having a benefit for the people that we work with. We think it's a great process. We're really proud of what we're doing. I'm going to come back to the challenges later on, many of which you'll have already heard, which actually makes me feel an awful lot better. But Grace is going to now talk you through the process, how we do it, and share some of the successes that we've had.
Thank you, Jenny. Good morning, everyone. As Jenny said, my name's Grace. I lead the university's public engagement with research strategy. And I'm here to talk about the nuts and bolts, because everybody likes the kind of big picture, but they also want to know the detail of how it works. There's a particular process that our Get Involved Awards go through. The first one is this expression of interest. So this is where we open up to anyone within this PL postcode who is a community group, a social enterprise, a charity, can submit an expression of interest form. And what that is a very simple form that basically says, what's your question, what's your problem, or what are you interested in working with us in? We then kind of do some office checks just to make sure that they are kind of eligible to go forward. And then during that process as well, while they're thinking through their question, they can get in touch with us at any point to come and ask questions or just clarify and kind of triage their question. And also we often go out to kind of networks and groups where we can talk to many different organisations in the kind of same room about the awards and kind of let them know what's going on. So, I've gone forward too many. I'm giving you too much of a glimpse. So, once they've submitted their expression of interest, we then match them with researchers. So, if sometimes they submit an expression of interest and they already know the researcher that they want to work with, because they've either continued to work with them and they want to kind of carry on, or they've gone, oh no, we saw that person, we know that's who we want to work with. So it's my job to kind of review those expression of interests and match where we've got the research expertise with those expression of interests. And we get, mostly, I have to say, Plymouth researchers are good eggs. They generally want to get involved in this type of stuff. It's why I love working at Plymouth, because it's got such a heart for its city and its region, and the researchers really understand and want to be working in the city and the region. So usually matches are good. But at that stage, we do have some expressions of interest that aren't matched, or that I just couldn't find a researcher that had the capacity at that moment. So we often go back and let them know they weren't matched, but to encourage them, if we did have the researchers, but timing was an issue, to kind of come back in future rounds as well. So once they've been matched, they come together for a facilitation day. So this is a half-day in-person event on the university campus where they get to, often, some people are meeting for the first time as a partnership at that facilitation day, but we do encourage them prior to the facilitation day for them to get in touch with each other and start to talk through their ideas of a proposal together. So that facilitation day is a great day. The last one that we held for this year's awards, we had about 45 people in a room. We got them playing human bingo and all sorts to kind of get them to meet other people in the room and kind of learn from each other, as well as find out about the awards. So they then get to ask me all the questions that they want to ask about what the awards are, and I get to talk them through what a good proposal looks like and what are the elements that we're going to be looking at when we come to review it. And then they get dedicated time at the end of that day to start work on their proposal together. And we found that was a really good way to physically force them to get together to start working on their awards. We also get them to think about the partnership and what are the roles and how are they going to work together, and think through what good partnership working looks like for some of them. For many researchers at Plymouth, they've done participatory research, they understand it, they've worked in collaborative ways, so it's kind of nothing new for them, but for other researchers, this is a new way of working. And so for us, it's really important that they understand that this isn't just a piece of consultancy, this is about working with those community groups, and vice versa, that the community groups kind of understand their role in it, and that they're not just passive and receiving kind of research, that actually they have an element to play in terms of shaping the research questions, collecting the data, analysing it, and then working out how they can use what they find going forward. So we've matched them, they've come together, and now they're doing their proposal development. So again, it's another form that they have to fill in, but we've kept it quite simple. So we basically ask them, what do you want to do? How will it benefit your community? And what kind of are the benefits beyond your community, either for similar communities in different areas, or for the researcher as well, what are the benefits for the research community in terms of the knowledge that they'll gain through this process? We ask them what they want to spend their money on, and for when it comes to the awards, we allow costs for both community partner time as well as academic time. What we often end up find is happening is that more senior academics are actually working with research assistants who are doing a lot of the data collection, and those senior academics kind of leading the project and really being that partnership management, but they kind of go for the research assistant to bring those kind of university costs down. And then they can also apply for any project costs that are related. So we've paid for things like skateboards, soil, plants. You'll find out, I'll talk about those later on. But we basically help get those projects going. So once they've done that, they then submit their proposal and it gets reviewed. And we have a lovely review panel made up of internal people, so people who are professional service staff, who are researchers, but we also crucially have external reviewers as well who are paid for their time in reviewing and attending those processes. And that has been a really valuable part of this process, because they often come to a review meeting and those internal to the university university who might not necessarily have the connections and that kind of broader sense of the city and beyond will go, this project's great, and then they'll go, this project is great, but they've also massively missed out this community, this organisation, and so they're able to provide that lens that we would just not necessarily have. So hugely beneficial to that. Everyone gets feedback, whether they were successful or not, and we also really nurture and encourage those that were almost there, just kind of what needed to be tweaked or refined, and to come back next year. And so we're very good. That's very much part of our process, is that we don't just want to leave people kind of high and dry. We want them to know maybe why they weren't funded, what elements of the project do they need to work on, and also, like I said, kind of really encourage people. So there's other things about the process, which is just kind of our overall approach, which I think are really important, and it echoes probably a lot of what's already been said. We go for a relationship-based model, so we're very much about, it's me, Grace, or we have a public engagement officer called Sarah, and we are people, so we're very good at kind of making those friendships and establishing those working relationships. People know it's us. We have a dedicated email address for the awards as well, and we have our phone numbers, and we're very much like, please do contact us, and we also go out to those communities. When the people get funded, we bring them together as a cohort for the majority, for the rest of their project, and that really helps them get a bit of peer support around things like getting their ethics through and things like that, payment processes, etc. And we really do bring them together, and they get to kind of update each other throughout those 8 months of how they're getting on, and kind of share their successes and celebrate with one another, but also do, pats on the backs and, oh yes, we had that problem as well, when things are going tough. We've already talked about our external guidance, which has been invaluable in making sure that we're not just assuming what people want in a funding scheme, but actually we're aware of the ecosystem in which we want to be kind of engaging with as well. Once all the projects get funded, we offer community researcher training. So this is offered to both community partners and the research partner. And that is because whilst most of the researchers who take part are already cognizant of doing collaborative research and working with community organisations, there are those who aren't. And so they get the same training as the community researchers around what does good research look like in terms of peer research and collaborative research. And so they get to come to that. And that's run by our kind of in-house evaluation experts and kind of research experts called Serio. We've already said it's supported by participatory research funding, and it is topped up by a bit of hype as well, where we get kind of a glut of really great applications. So over the 2 years, we have had kind of this growth, as you'll see, of applications. So in the first year, we had 25 expressions of interest, and then we were able to fund 6. 4 of those were in our Faculty of Arts, Humanities and Business, and that really reflects the fact that for that faculty, one of their key themes is people and place. Placemaking, participatory research, etc. is their jam. So they were very comfortable in this zone. But you'll see for this year, we've managed to get all 3 of our faculties, and I'm so delighted that we've got science and engineering in there. And so some of the projects that they're working on this year is one around soil quality for a community farm as well, and to do things like that. So the community group are also kind of collecting samples and kind of analysing it, and they get to go in the lab with the researchers and things like that. So you'll see one of the issues of that is a great drop-off from the number of applications that we have to the number of awards that we receive. And we are very clear about that in the run-up to this process, that they know it's a competitive process and that the success rates are quite small. And so because we also wanted to make sure that people are aware of that, because it is quite a lot of time to lead up to kind of submitting their proposal together. So I'm going to run through some of the awards that we funded last year and kind of what they've been up to. So we had, this one is the one where we funded soil and some plants. So this is a horticultural wellbeing group set up by a charity who wanted to support people who were living with cancer or who were in remission from cancer. And it's a kind of a 6-week project where they all come together on a plot and they just do gardening. So they plant seeds and they potter around on the plot. And they found the research was looking at kind of why does this work? Like, how is this benefiting people? So it helped the community group and the charity kind of understand what works, and then to be able to share that as a replicable model with other groups who are interested in this. We know that it's worked. We know the partnership's gone really well. They're still continuing to work together, even though the funding's finished. They're looking at different research projects as well to do together. And the community group has been able to access funding for future courses based on the fact that they were able to share the results of this funding. The Plymouth Devon Racial Equality Council wanted to look at incidents of racial hatred in Plymouth city centre. So they work with our researchers in criminology to kind of understand, and they work with a range of different partners in the city as well. They wanted to, you can see it's quite a complex problem, right? So you're like, how can they fix that in 8 months? They didn't, but what it did was give them those first kind of glimpses and understandings that they can then start to kind of use and build upon in that kind of snowball. It also allows them to raise the visibility of their organisation and network with other key anchor institutions in Plymouth as well. And it's leading on to further projects as well. And other cities and towns want to look at the model that this project has done and kind of use those and kind of replicate it going forward further. And lastly, we had a lovely skateboard project. So this is Skate to the Max, who are a community interest company interested in raising awareness of skateboard safety, basically wearing kind of protective kit, particularly helmets. So what they wanted to do was understand the data that was out there around the number of incidences of physical trauma by people not wearing helmets and kind of safety gear when skateboarding, but then also try to understand what are some of those social barriers to people wearing helmets, etc. So they did things like they looked at a national kind of trauma research network kind of database that they could access, so they've been looking at that. They held some skate jams as well with the young people to really start to understand what's going on, and they had prizes of like make your own skateboards and things like that. And this has absolutely helped quite a young community interest company be able to build on using really strong foundations of this project and kind of look forward to what actually it is that they want to really kind of zone in on in future funding and projects. So you can see they're actually really successful, and we're mega proud. We're dead proud of the Get Involved Awards. We think they're brilliant, and we know that they work because we've evaluated it. So we evaluate right from the beginning all the way through. We're collecting data so that we can track how things are going on, both the successes, and then I've nicely given Jenny the challenges to talk about. So we know it works. We know it builds capacity for both researchers and communities. So this isn't just about a university kind of bestowing its knowledge on the community. It's actually about researchers going, oh, I'm stepping into research for the first time after a career break, or where I've been very much focused on education. And this has given me that confidence to kind of step back into this as well. We've been able to provide that kind of proof and evidence that communities often need in terms of applying for further funding that is in a rigorous way. And it's been able to raise the visibility of what is research in Plymouth, but also about Plymouth and the university and how we are working in and around our city. Last slide for you to see some of these lovely quotes that come from our community engagement organisations first. And then Jenny's going to talk about some of the challenges.
Thank you. I'm not going to spend too much time on challenges, not because they're challenges, but actually there's a lot of commonality there. And it's, as I was listening to the other speakers, I'm thinking, actually, as a sector, there's some things we need to look at here because we're all facing very similar challenges. The first one is around that partnership working, and I think the colleagues in Derby raised it. It's about our researchers understanding that it's not about bestowing that information. It is about listening and co-designing, but it's also about our community groups understanding that our researchers have really heavy workloads, high teaching loads, high research loads, and they might not be as responsive as maybe the community organisation wants or expects. Navigating the university finance system. Again, colleagues from King's, I was very happy to hear that because it's been an absolute blinking nightmare trying to get the money from us out to the community groups. And we're actually thinking of adopting what Derby are doing and actually putting the money out to an umbrella voluntary sector organisation to distribute the money out to the community groups. We've done a how-to guide, which is great, but the how-to guide's still probably about 10 pages long and really complicated, and yeah, the community groups just absolutely hate it. And again, this has come up as, again, slipping timelines. We're working, because it's participatory research funding and HIFE, we've got hard cut-off dates, and actually trying to make sure we can get the projects contracted, in place and delivered in time can be a bit of a challenge. We have to talk very nicely to our finance people and see whether they can jiggle things around a little bit for us. And yet that capacity building on both sides, about it being genuinely about co-design and mutual benefit. But I think that the fact that these challenges are common across the sector, I think as a sector we need to be looking at how we can do this a bit different and a bit better for everybody's benefit, for ours and for the communities we work with. And we're very honest that our process isn't perfect. And as part of the evaluation, we get our community groups together and we say, tell us what's worked well and tell us what hasn't, what's frustrated you, what's been difficult, where have the barriers been. And we're going to very bravely put some of that up to say this is the feedback we've got. You will note, for those eagle-eyed amongst you, that the final quote is a repeat. I'd love to say it's just because it's so good we thought we'd put it in twice, but actually we forgot to take it off. So that's what it is. So you can see that the community partners are very much looking at the university systems. There is that thing about managing expectations on both sides and, you know, timescales, whether we can actually start the process a bit earlier in the year so we've got a bit longer to get through to the sort of the end points. But, you know, that iterative process is really important because we definitely don't know everything. We're definitely learning as we're going on. You know, 2022 was great. 23 will be better. By the time we get to 24, I can't even think about how brilliant we're going to be. So, next steps. As a university, we are committed to the Get Involved Awards. We are going to continue to use the external funding that we get to put back out to the community and continue it. We're thinking about some follow-on funding because what we found with some of our projects is they've got maybe 80% to where they want to go. And if we just had a little bit of a top-up, they could get all the way and make that next step. So we're looking to see if there's any way that we can do some follow-on and top-up funding. But probably the most crucial thing for us in terms of the next steps is a really thorough evaluation of all of our participatory research and community engagement and looking at where that mutual benefit is, you know, really being able to articulate to our community groups and our city the value of working with us, but also being able to articulate really clearly to our researchers the value of engaging in participatory research and the value it can have to them, both in terms of their research profile. You know, we've had ref impact case studies from participatory research, so we know actually from an academic perspective, it's also a really fantastic thing to do. So yeah, we're committed to it, we love it, and that, I think, Grace, is us.
That is.
Thank you. Some common themes there. I should probably reserve the first question for any university finance directors in the audience. Do we have any? Or... Anyway, as promised, we do have some questions. I believe there are a couple of roving mics, or at least one about. There's one at the back. Yeah, brilliant. Oh, another one there. Fantastic. So, are there any questions? Just kind of wave a hand. If not, we'll kind of pick one up. Yes, one here. Sorry, you're going to have to come to the front with the mic there. I knew there was going to be some running in this session.
I suspect this may be more relevant for some of you than others, but I wonder about controlling access to the community organisations from the obvious flood of researchers who will want to work with them, and the extent to which that's necessary, how that can be managed, how we prevent fantastic relationships from becoming hugely burdensome to community groups, and yeah, is that a problem? Are there solutions that you've found yet?
Can I maybe suggest we turn to our kind of external first for a perspective on that question? Because I'd be really interested to see what that view is first before we kind of open it up to our university colleagues.
Yes, of course, thank you. I was really interested to hear about your project in great detail, and in fact I'm going to be contacting you in the next couple of weeks for a proper follow-up. Research is something that we're really keen to do because I can see that it benefits the community groups enormously, and also it's a requirement for the university, and it's a good opportunity to bring some more funding into the work that we're doing. I think where we are, there seem to be a lot of barriers to getting involved in research, and I've been involved in both sides. So I've gone out to community groups and I've said, have you got any research projects? Thinking they'd be delighted and bite my hand off. And in actual fact, most of them are so focused on the here and now and the bread and butter of their job that they don't even know really what research might look like. So it's a bigger conversation that needs to be had. I think we need to deliver some training sessions around that, what that research could be and how it could benefit them and why they might want to get involved before we would reach a stage of being inundated with requests. Most of the requests that we have around research tend to be about evaluation and impact rather than actually meaty, exciting, new knowledge type work. So again, that is another barrier, I think, to community groups getting involved. I have then had my list of 6 or 7 research opportunities, which I've then gone back to the university with, and I've found it quite challenging, perhaps, to find a researcher who has capacity, has the interest, has the skills and knowledge to deliver that piece of work. So that's another, I'd like some help with how you're achieving that. But then I've also done it the other way around. So I've gone to the university and I've said, right, you've got a Derby Impact group, and we've got these impact officers in place. You know, the university is really well set up for thinking how we can deliver more community-based research projects. And I've had lists of researchers and experts in their field who are looking for research projects, and I thought, brilliant, you know. And then I find out what the topics are, and I think, oh, crikey, I don't know how I'm going to do this. So I would say from our point of view, it's a challenge we haven't yet faced, that there's been inundation, because there seem to be barriers on both sides and significant challenges with marrying up good relationships. So as I say, I listened with open ears, and I can't wait to see if we can share some of your learnings to make some more things happen in Derbyshire. I mean, that sounds quite negative, and we have had some amazing successes. But certainly, with regard to your question, I don't think being inundated is an issue at this stage yet.
And
My dream
perhaps,
would be in 5 years, perhaps it is.
So perhaps, Dan, you can have it. And then perhaps I'd like to come after that over to Grace and Jenny, because you kind of have a scheme that offers a sort of a moderation of input and demand as well, don't you? But please, Dan.
Well, I was just thinking about it on a wider scale as well as just the direct, again, from my point of view, that the connection between research is more than just the research, that there's a whole plethora of things that they do, as Grace and Jenny described. But I think there is something about, I've had discussions, especially around minoritised communities who traditionally haven't had a lot of power, and bringing them in. I mean, I have constantly in my head bringing them into a situation where they don't have a lot of powers and bringing us out in a situation where they do have more power. That is a question I'm also always asking myself. And there is something around positive gatekeeping as well as negative gatekeeping. And yes, I think it is essential in some ways until the environment has been built up, that you've got researchers. If you're lucky and you have researchers who are already centred around people, around social justice, then brilliant. But if you don't, what are you bringing those partnerships into? So it's important for there to be training, but also there to be upskilling and value building, which I think is essential, which I think runs through all of our work, but it's something we must recognise that it's, and when you're in, you know, being able to do, like the project that Grace, and I'll let you obviously talk about your project, but we've done something similar, and that when it has that ring fencing of being supported, but what happens when it's outside of that? And the thought that you have to make sure that you're bringing your community partnerships and relationships, which you spend a lot of time and personal labour and emotional labour building, into a safe and brave space that isn't hostile. And so I just really feel passionately about that as well, because I think we sometimes don't realise we can't just give it over, and we have to be cognizant of that so that we are saying that to the people. We're saying, yes, of course, we want you to work with lots of people, but how are you doing it? And are you going to reflect the way that we've built this original relationship.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Grace. It will come on automatically.
It's on. Okay. Patience, Grace. I think the Get Involved Awards is one process of us managing that, but it's really about community. So it's, it's not about kind of gatekeeping and kind of managing research overwhelm for those communities. Outside of that scheme, absolutely at Plymouth, there are organisations who get particularly overwhelmed with requests to hold events, do collaborative work with them, be named on a research bid, etc. And there is absolutely fatigue from those organisations. And I think there's an internal job for us as our key messaging of good partnership working, but also knowing that we're here and that there are, groups and teams, etc., in the university who will have an understanding of the kind of surrounding communities that are working with, kind of knowing and can triage those kind of requests. But the other thing is I kind of acknowledge that it's going to happen, and there's no way that I can kind of control it to a definitive degree, but just trying to raise awareness of that kind of good partnership work. So I don't really have an answer.
If I could just add to that, I think it probably comes back to those relationships again. And I think from what we've found is those synergies have come out through conversations. So it hasn't been necessarily the university going, ta-da, we've got this idea, or the community group going, ta-da, as Jenny suggested. It's more about having those conversations and what synergies and ideas are born from those conversations, I think, is probably how I would put it. And coming back to your safe space, I think it is a really good way of perhaps how we've managed to navigate confidence of community groups coming to the university. It's a massive step for people to come into a large organisation that can be very daunting and a little bit get lost in terms of the amount of buildings. But we have a great space where Community Chesterfield are in our incubation units, so it's actually very quiet. They have an external entrance, and so we can facilitate a lot safer space if we don't go out to them. If we do decide to bring people in, we can actually offer that safe space, which I know Jenny has done many a times, because security can be very tight within a university, and that can be a barrier for people to come along. So yeah, safe space is certainly something that is up there as well about how we engage and support one another.
Thank you. Good question. Probably more conversation we could have around that issue by the sound of it as well. Another question here. Is there another one I'll come to next? But we'll come to this lady first, and then, yep. Sorry, you're running down the stairs again.
Thank you very much. I think this question is for Diane, please. I'm really interested in, I just love the fact that you are embedded in the community and that you are building those relationships of trust. But I'm just wondering how you are managing the expectations between quite a kind of narrow discipline and what those communities need from the rest of the university. How do you see your role in facilitating that? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes. I think for me it's about transparency from the very beginning. And it doesn't always work, and it's a constant thing. So as the kind of relationship builds, as the kind of ideas come out, they get bigger, they get grander, and it's about always bringing it back to kind of what we can do, what we have, but also challenging ourselves. But signposting, and that's why it's been so important to understand what else is going on in the college and who are my colleagues, my peers, and being able to then go, well, I can't do that, we have talked about that, but I do know a person, let me introduce you. So I become a connector as well. And that is how I get away from the guilt of not being able to do everything. I hope that answers your question.
Anybody else, any perspectives on that sort of aspect of, no, okay. Grace, did you want to?
Just from our point of view, I think that is certainly something that we've had to explore in terms of managing connections. I know Jenny spends a lot of time, and it's something that actually we measure in terms of its impact in numbers, in terms of we call them meaningful connections, because I think that is really important that, you know, we can't oversee absolutely everything to the infinite detail, but actually if we can make those meaningful connections for individuals, then that again is when those synergism relationships start, and they can always come back for us for that guidance and support if needed.
Yeah, okay. We're nearly at the end of the session. We've probably got time for one very quick question if there is anything further from anybody. Give me a big wave if there is. Just one here quickly. Yeah, we'll have to be really brief in answering this because I'm conscious we're between you and coffee and Kate.
Two of the groups talked about in different ways selecting who they work with, and I think Darby, you mentioned identifying people because they're suitable to benefit from what you were offered, or selecting people because they are suitable for benefit. And it struck me, how do you navigate the kind of ethics around biases, assumptions, and work with people who might offer something that doesn't fit within an existing framework of what is benefit or what might be successful?
Derbyshire Voluntary Action is an infrastructure charity with over 337 members, member organisations, and most of what we do we put out to all of those organisations. So for example, the Training and Tea programme, the Connect and Reflect, a lot of the bigger scale things we do, we advertise widely to everybody, and that gives us an opportunity to build up really good relationships with people. Most of the opportunities that we get from the University of Derby, you know, a researcher looking for a project and participants for a project, for example, we put that out to all of them, and then we support those that come forwards and find out more information from those. When selecting sort of topics for training and delivery, we work really closely with the community organisations themselves and find out what they need, and we try very hard to be as grassroots led as possible. So I don't think we do that much sort of policing or selecting. I think people tend to self-select, and the advantage to the way we work is actually there is such a huge number of people that we're in touch with and we're connected with and that we meet. So I can't remember the statistic off the top of my head, but out of those 337 organisations, within the first year, about 167 of them attended training sessions delivered by us and incorporating skills and knowledge from the University of Derby. So they tend to very much sort of self-select rather than us having to monitor it. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. Some good questions there. I'm going to have to draw the session to a close. I'm conscious we're at the end of the time there, so please join me once again just thanking all our speakers for a really insightful session. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.